48-hour art check, episode 114.
We think.
Okay, so let's make sure that everything works here. Now that I pushed the wrong button and screwed everything up. All right. Good times. And I got to get this out of the way. Okay. All right. Now we're good to go.
All right. So sorry we didn't end up going yesterday. So we're kind of making up for it today. And then tomorrow, our 48-hour art check, I think, will take place during the Artcasters. So
yeah, that'll be cool.
Lots of fun surprises, but yeah. So being a member of the NCS, I got invited to take my family onto the DreamWorks campus and check out How to Train Your Dragon 3, and private screening introduced by the director. It was really fun. It was like 10 people in a tiny theater with really great sound that I think they probably test films with and stuff. And we got to check out that and walk around, and Benji was having a blast. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure which theater you were in, but they also, they don't do screen tests on, like, if they're looking at something, they don't look at it on computer screens. They'll like, all right, let's take a look at these assets, and they go in there and they look at it. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, the campus is impressive as hell, and it's one of those things where I've known people who work there. I know the long hours they pull and stuff like that, but there's still a little bit of magic to it for me because I've never worked in that industry. So for me, it's like it's still got that fresh take,
Oh
fun.
Yeah, for sure.
So Squatchy and Pepper are in the chats.
Up,
welcome.
guys?
Yeah, nice to see you guys.
Yeah.
All right, should we jump into it?
Yeah. Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Let's do it.
Okay. What'd you get done?
So you're not seeing all of the panels. You're just seeing the latest. But I'm halfway through the last panel of Quarterly Stories. And then I have panel 6 to ink tonight for the anthology. Yeah.
Cool.
And if I seem a little off today, it's literally I'm thrown off because I'm exhausted, and thus is the 100 days.
Yeah, that's kind of how that goes. I feel like a lot of the time. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So for me, I wasn't able to show some stuff because I was remote. So I finally finished this page. This stupid page that's been taking me forever. Turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. There's some parts that I might still noodle with. And then I got a few stickers done. One of them is a little bit of a cheat because you'll see that I did the inks from this page and just colored them, but still counts because I still like it as a sticker. So yeah, so that's kind of what I've gotten done.
Awesome. Sorry.
That's okay.
Still falling on my desk. Good.
Yeah. So how about
I'm stoked you were able to finish that page. It's been a beast, and so it must be kind of a bit of a relief having that done.
Yeah, it's nice, and I think the shading on the ship, I'm gonna kind of work on that a little bit so it's not so harsh. I'm gonna have it kind of gradiate a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah, for the most part, it does what I want it to do. And it'll read a little bit easier because I'm going to add in a little bit of gray wash digitally later. So
perfect.
But yeah, so it's looking good. So how about challenges?
So challenges are literally just juggling a lot of plates, and so things falling over on my desk is a really good analogy of just like the way this this past week has been going. So making a lot of progress on personal projects at work, and then trying to kind of stay on top of the 100 days challenge and trying to stay on top of my comic is just proving to be a lot of work. One thing that was really encouraging for me was last night, one of the guys who kind of runs the NCS was just like, dude, you're always pushing out pages. and I was like, I don't feel that way. It was somebody I really respect who's like worked for Disney and like is a pretty hardcore cartoonist, and um, was just like, well, like, so when are you thinking about finishing? And when I mentioned kind of where I'm at on my book and stuff, he was like, that's a huge undertaking, man. You're almost there.
Yeah.
So, congrats. And that was a bit of encouragement, because it's easy to kind of get lost in our bubbles and kind of forget that, like, to a lot of artists, like getting 100 pages or something of something done is a huge undertaking, whereas to me, I'm looking at guys who do 400, 500 page books in the amount of time I'm doing my 100 pages, and it doesn't seem like a lot. So that
You
was
should
encouraging.
you should look at the other side of people that do 3 pages in the amount of time that you've been done 60.
Yeah, yeah, fair point. Fair point.
So, yeah. Well, that's good, man. That's good. I always like those little moments where people that you respect kind of give you a nod, and you're like, oh, that's surprising. That's awesome.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, because I think it's easy for us to get stuck in our own little kind of bubbles, especially with the isolation that's involved with cartooning and stuff. So
yeah.
it's part of why we encourage things like the art check. It just kind of keeps you accountable, but not only that, it keeps you aware of everybody else's struggles to kind of get these things done.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Challenges for me, I just sleeping. And time management.
Feel that one.
Driving in snow has been a lot of what's been taking up most of the time. So the weekend was mainly shot with a bunch of stuff, and then so yesterday I stayed up way too late, and I had to like snow blow the driveway, and anyway, just normal living in the north. That's kind of what it was. But I mean, mainly just travel, which is good. I mean, it was a good trip, but I mean, driving and being on the road is hard. So basic stuff. I didn't have any cool cartoonists tell me that my work is good, so that wasn't that didn't happen. How about plans?
Okay, so I'm planning on finishing the next page of quarterly stories tonight, and then hopefully having thumbnails. But then again, considering our art checks tomorrow, I'll just say I'm planning on finishing that page.
Yeah.
And then I'd like to get another page of the anthology done tonight. So that'll leave me like 3 days to kind of finish up this page and get on to page 4. So it's weird. It's like slow and steady, and it's very mapped out. So I'm pretty sure I'll hit the deadline. But it is interesting, like getting closer and closer to April and being like, yeah, it's not quite as quick as I was hoping.
Right.
I don't know if you have that kind of going, but
Oh, I thought
yeah,
I'd be completely done by now.
yeah,
And I would have been, had I not given in to peer pressure and done another sticker stint in the middle of it. But at the same time, I probably would have started an animation or something. But yeah, I feel like I should have been farther. I'm fine with my progress. I mean, it's not like I'm speeding through it. I probably could have knocked it out already if that was my goal. But I'm just taking my time because we've got time. So
yeah. And Squatchy in the chats actually said the page looks awesome. So
oh,
I think that's
thanks.
kind of the byproduct of taking your time with these things. Um, and it's funny because you keep mentioning the ship. I think even on social media, and I think the ship's working out. So
Thanks.
um, yeah, so just hang in there, and I think you'll get it done.
Yeah, yeah, it'll come. And this last page that I'm doing is pretty crazy. Actually, I'll show you during plans. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but it's pretty complicated. There's a bunch of, it's like a giant montage of, let's see how many, one, two, three, four, five, six giant battles that they're having with a bunch of different monsters. And I did it like in a a wash of sea foam so that the foam of the waves are the panel borders, and then they're kind
Nice.
of broken up. So, uh, yeah, I'll get at least one panel done by tomorrow. Um, so that's kind of where I plan to be by then. But then, yeah, I mean this page will take me a little time. One of the panels is going to be kind of interesting because it'll be a different style that I normally do because one of the monsters that they're fighting has the ability to cause people to hallucinate, and so
All right.
I'm doing one of the panels in this old kind of cartoony pattern style where everything is going to be a really intricate pattern, but it'll all be kind of mono weight, so like none of the line weight will change. So I'll do it with like markers instead of brushes. So
Nice.
yeah, it'll be kind of fun. So
I love the amount of experimentation you've been doing with the inks and stuff on this. Actually, I think it's cool. It's like at one point you were using fingerprints
yeah,
and smudging and just all kinds of techniques that I want to dip into, and it's kind of neat to see how fearlessly you're approaching it. So
yeah. Well, it's that's what's cool about a 4-page story is I mean if you take a toothbrush like I did, I took a toothbrush and splattered, and I've only splattered with paintbrushes before,
yeah,
and I hate working with a toothbrush. So I found that out. But at the same time, like it's a 4-page story, so it's not like the end of the world. Like I haven't ruined a 300-page thing that
yeah,
I'm working on. So
yeah. Yeah, it's weird with the toothbrush. It's a little less controlled, so you really have to mask stuff off before
right,
you kind of mess with it. Um, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think for me, for my plans, I already kind of went through plans, so I think we're good. Did I
yeah,
already hit my plans? I think I did.
yeah. You did. You're gonna get the page done tomorrow night during Artcasters.
Yeah, so there we go. So once again, kind of exhausted today.
Yeah. So
So let's.
tell me what you've accomplished in the last couple of days, Josh. Just kidding.
Oh goodness, we're starting over.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just messing with you.
No, it's okay. It's the time to do it. Sleep depth.
Yeah.
Okay, well let's dip into the topic and see if we can kind of give it any credence today. It seems like Squatchy and Pepper in the chats are kind of going through a similar struggle. So I'm imagining they're taking on a lot, and that's kind of what we do as artists. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so today's topic is working remotely and working with remote partners. And so I wanted to talk about this because I am going to be starting in a situation where I'm going to be doing a lot of project management with teams spread across the US and possibly in the future across the world. And I think management of assets, and when I say assets, I'm talking about like the things that you are creating. So, for example, I've got a short film that I've been trying to do myself, and I've been really toying with the idea of getting some other people involved. And that would mean that we'd have to manage those assets. I need so and so to, do the leg of this character. I need these guys to do the background, and I need somebody to look over the
Yeah.
storyboard. So there's all of these moving pieces in a project, and it doesn't even have to be a complicated project like a short film, like an animated short film. It could even be, just like a simple graphic design project, where you've got some people shooting some photos for you and other people doing some layout, or I've managed catalogs, and Josh, I mean, you do this all the time, um, but I've done all that in person.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to talk about like what changes when you're not in the same bullpen, what changes when you're not in the same office, and how might you, do that so that you're setting up your collaborators for success rather than what happens when things break down is everybody always blames the other people, like, oh,
Yeah.
blah blah blah. And so I just wanted to go through maybe just real quick a couple things that I've been thinking about to kind of get started. But just any thoughts to kind of kick it off?
Yeah, I mean, So most books on entrepreneurship and running your own business will kind of touch on this, but there's kind of a rule of thumb when it comes to sort of outsourcing, and what you're doing is outsourcing, even if it's like domestic outsourcing, it's still outsourcing. And there's a rule of thumb with outsourcing that's really important not to overlook, which is it's really hard at the beginning.
Yeah.
Implementation of outsourcing is really dependent on proper back planning, really clear communication, and a lot of back planning when it comes to deadlines. So what you don't want to do when you're outsourcing, from my experience, is become too reliant on the outsourced assets. Um, so that's where you back plan your deadlines. Like maybe your deadline that you give someone in Arizona is different than the deadline you give your in-house guy here locally.
Yeah.
Because you need to allot for time. And the biggest challenge I'd say with outsourcing is you don't have people on the clock to make revisions. So you have to kind of back plan for that as well, because art is a weird process that requires a lot of revision, and sometimes minimal revision depending on the clarity of the communication at the get-go. But you need to kind of plan that into your schedule, because once again, you're beholden to a deadline of your own. And so a lot of it's just about effective back planning, effective distribution of the work, and then just a lot of early stages of spitballing. So like a perfect example of that is like right now I'm working with two artists, like one in Cambodia and one is in, I think, Iraq. Um, and these are 3D modelers. And so I had to kind of set up a system to kind of create a 3D modeling situation for these people that works really effectively. And part of that was a lot of back and forth on what was acceptable, what's not acceptable, because these are things that are going to be made into physical molds.
Yeah.
And 3D printed. And so it's a little different than kind of something being made for just optics, for like film, because a lot of the time with film, you can get away with a 3D model that maybe is hollow on the back or has like holes in it in areas that people can't see. But when it comes to something that's going to be 3D printed, it has to be physically perfect, to be able to be in an injection mold.
Right.
And then there's all sorts of considerations with that. My point is, the clearer you are with those considerations from the get-go, the easier it is to do minor revisions to kind of get to the end goal that everybody's trying to get to. But I will say it becomes complicated mainly because of communication. And one thing that's great about having people on site or in front of you is generally there's a time expectation. So if you have somebody from 9 to 5, you have them there to make whatever changes they need to do, like in a timely manner.
Yeah, and you can just walk over to their desk and say, "Hey, Bob, by the way, blah 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 blah."
Yeah, there's a lot of time bought for troubleshooting, and then quicker turnarounds, which is the whole domestic versus outsourcing kind of argument in general. Is like, when you're working locally, you can get quick turnarounds. When you're working domestically or when you're working internationally, the turnaround time is extended a lot. And then you also have to take into consideration, if you're using freelancers, that they aren't beholden to your schedule.
Right.
And so you have to kind of back plan that in. But I do think with proper back planning, you can have a really good relationship with outsourced teams. It's just a matter of building the team at first. That's kind of the headache.
Yeah. But once a lot of what you're saying, I feel like falls into the category of communication, in a specific niche of communication, something that I find super important that I've focused on in client work, and that I think will translate really well into kind of remote management, is expectation management. And so if and I always tell this to students. They'll come to me and they'll say, "Oh, I've got this client," and blah 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 blah, and they start complaining about the client. And I always tell them, "No, that's not your client's fault.
Yeah.
That is your fault for not managing the expectations correctly."
Yeah.
And so if at the beginning of the relationship, you don't talk about this type of stuff, like, "Hey, when do you typically work?" Like you're 7 hours different because you're across the world, or you're in New York, and so you're 2 or 3 hours different, or whatever. When might I be able to get a hold of you? What's that type of thing. And
What
then
does Tuesday mean for you when you say due Tuesday? Like
yeah,
simple questions like that can cut a lot of miscommunication that leads to a lot of failure for early artists, because you might think that 12 a.m. on Tuesday is going to cut it, but if you're doing an editorial for a company that closes at 6, you've just blown your deadline,
yeah,
and you didn't hit Tuesday. And they
that
said Tuesday, but they meant Tuesday at 5 o'clock or Tuesday at 4 o'clock, where it allots 2 hours for revision.
yeah, that's a really good point, because Tuesday could mean I want it, in my inbox when I come into work on Tuesday, or Tuesday could
Yeah,
mean, I want it before I leave from my office at 6 p.m. on
yeah,
Tuesday, or Tuesday could mean you have all day Tuesday till 11:59, or technically till like 6 a.m. Wednesday, because what I really wanted is I really want it when I come in on Wednesday. And you should never assume in that situation, whether you're giving
yeah,
that assignment or receiving that assignment. You should always be clear. And that was the other thing that I kind of, as you were talking, I was kind of processing. The other part of communication is something that I teach a lot, is delegation.
yeah,
People assume that they have delegated something when they've asked somebody to do something, but
yeah,
that's not actual delegation. Delegation, whether you're delegating to a group of people or whether you're delegating to an individual, always has a single person that's responsible. There might be more than one person working on it,
yeah,
but ultimately a single person is responsible for that thing. So there's a name to it, there's a date and time, and there's clear deliverables. And so
yeah,
you're basically saying, I want you by this point in time to give me this. And
yeah.
unless you have each of those three components clearly understood and communicated, you haven't actually delegated something.
Yeah, agreed. And actually, you've touched on a word that I think you might have been maybe teasing at, because it's like, as an art director, I just heard it like 4 times, and I'm like, um, and it's like the warning lights flash off anytime I'm managing someone and they say I assumed. There's like a giant red flag that pops up, because one of the biggest problems with like just human beings in general is assumption.
Yeah.
We're not mind readers, and we're not really great at mind reading. And no matter how perceptive somebody assumes they are, um, generally, when you start getting into that area of assumption, it's better to confirm. And it's irritating in the short term, but it makes for a very successful career in the long term, because getting confirmation rather than assumption um, pretty much trumps like most communication failure.
Yeah.
So
And
most
so,
most places that communication breaks down is where somebody is jumping the gun and saying, "When you said this, I assumed this,"
right.
um, and that becomes even twice as problematic when you're dealing with a language barrier. So it's something to be really aware of as the servicer, as the person being hired to do freelance or hired to do contract work. Ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Ask any question, no matter how stupid, because like, to me, finding out what you mean by Tuesday, whether I know you're a busy art director or you're a busy person and I don't want to bug you, I'd rather find out that by Tuesday you meant Wednesday morning, or by Tuesday you meant at 2 a.m. on Tuesday, in your time. Like maybe it's Eastern time or Pacific time. Like, I need to find out those specifics so I can deliver what I'm being hired to do. And it's like a mutual thing, and I think that's why it takes a long time to build outsourcing and build kind of relationships that are not like in your house or in your office, but at the same time, it's worthwhile because it does save and cut costs in the long run because you don't have to pay the overhead for like a studio or for a school or for a business. You can kind of cut a lot of costs by doing outsourcing, but it just takes a long time to build.
Yeah, and you're not limited to the people that live within 30 miles of where you live.
Exactly.
You have access to whomever. Another thing that I think is an interesting challenge, and this is whether you're in person or whether you are remote, is that you are going to be using either written or spoken language to describe visual things. That is exceptionally difficult. And without what's called active listening, which is kind of an annoying process, but you seek for mutual agreement, that what you're saying and repeating back to them and rephrasing is what they're talking about. So here's an example of that. If I said, Josh, I'd like you to make this asset and I need it to be blue.
Yeah.
That literally could mean tens of thousands of different things.
Yeah. Do you mean royal blue? Which form of royal blue? Because there's two royal blues. There's one that's more on the hue of like cyan. There's one that's more on the hue of like blue is a vague statement,
right? And so that vague statement needs to be clarified, exactly. Because it also are you talking about an analogous color palette or a monochromatic color palette, or are we talking about a single color? Are we talking about like 5 shades of the same hue of blue but different values, or are we talking about like what do you mean exactly? And then
do you mean like a certain Pantone of blue? Because if it's one Pantone, then we're gonna have to halftone it, and then I need to know your line screen, right? Because like if your line screen minimum is like larger than what I'm assuming it is, then we might have a problem. So now I need to know like where you're printing and what their limitations are if we're using halftones. Like what Cory and I are getting at is that like something as simple as like what might seem really obvious, like where an art director or somebody assigning art just saying, hey, I need this in blue, might seem really clear. It's not. It's not necessarily clear. And that's why you kind of have to get over your ego as a servicer of somebody's needs in art and just ask the stupid question. Because I'd rather find out that, the person literally meant like they wanted blue 72. And that's what they meant by blue. Or 288, which is a pretty standard like navy. I'd rather know that than like, fly blind and at 1:00 when I'm pulling punches trying to hit a deadline, go, oh crap, what did they mean by blue?
Right.
Yeah, it's a complex process. I don't know if that I feel like we're teasing this topic, but
yeah, and maybe this can be part one and just dealing with, like the initial communication. Because I think something else could be, talking about creative briefs, talking about, like the language in a creative brief and what's important and why. I think that would be really interesting, a lot of those things. But ultimately, the challenge with this kind of analogy or this situation that we're describing, the challenge is that, Josh, as my art director, you could say, hey, I want this to be blue, and you have a perfect image in your mind of what you want that to look like. And then I hear that word blue, and I get a perfect image in my mind of what I think that you're saying, and they can be drastically different and likely are completely not on the same page because it's a vague instruction that was not clarified by the receiver of that instruction. And so both people can walk away with the expectation not managed, because that expectation is I communicated something and it was very clear because there were no questions asked. And on the other side, it could say, I heard that communication and he used words I understood and I got an image in my mind, so I understand what exactly I'm going to do. And so the expectation is that this is going to go well. And when it doesn't go well, that's where it's really frustrating. Whereas if you were to say, do you understand what I mean by that? Can I clarify this for you? And I say, yeah, it's like this, right? And you're like, no, not at all, right? Or I would just say, oh, okay, Blue. So what you're saying is like, you want it like this? And you're like, no, actually, what I mean is this. And then there's that back and forth. Whoever initiates it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But there's that back and forth of clarification that sometimes is like, hey, you know what? Just let me send you this picture. Like
Yeah.
this is what I'm talking about. I've got a mood board here, or get out your Pantone sheet and look at this one, or what I'm looking at is actually HSB these numbers, or whatever it is. There's usually that back and forth until there's like, oh, we need to get to a point where we both go, I see what you're saying, right? And this happens
Yeah.
with clients, it happens with freelancers, whatever. And with clients, it's super hard because many of these clients that are hiring us to do these things are hiring us because they have no ability to do these things, which means that
Yeah.
they have even less ability to communicate them.
So I kind of want to tack onto that with like some of the horror words you never want to hear as a freelancer. And maybe when you're new to it, you might be excited to hear these things. One is you're creative, be creative. Just, just go wild with it.
Run.
Um, Now, if you're like a young student and you're just getting into it, you might buy into that and then you'll be really creative and deliver something that's completely not what the person had envisioned. And then you have a problem.
Unless you
You
have a
know,
good contract, then you're all right.
yeah. Hopefully, you have a really good contract that allots for revision time and for clear briefs. Um, but like another one that's really bad is just like make it pop or make something cool and trendy. Like these are all words
Yeah.
that are meaningless words because what you might perceive as cool or trendy is different than what I might perceive as cool and trendy. Um, so you need to start thinking when you're dealing with building outsourced teams, it's like you really want to start breaking down the art process so that like it would be very difficult to misunderstand your intention. And so that's where communication becomes key. And I think we'll have to touch on this at a later time and kind of really get into it. But there are methods to kind of like really break down the communication. And I'd say like a good rule of thumb is just assume it will be done wrong. When you're writing it out, assume that the person doesn't speak fluent English, that they have no idea what you're talking about, and it's your job to paint a perfect vision of what you want delivered.
Okay, I'm gonna play devil's advocate. You ready?
Yeah.
But Josh, that takes so much time, and I'm really busy.
So that's the thing, and that's actually a really big thing because that actually prevents a lot of businesses and a lot of people from having successful art teams. The short-term investment of that time is going to save you so much money and time from the revision process because the clearer you are from the get-go, the less likely you are to have to make that later investment of massive time where now you're doing cleanup. So you're doing work that rather than being preventative and proactive, you're having to be reactive. And in business, being reactive is usually a very bad thing because if you're proactive, you're ahead of trends. If you're proactive, you're leading industry. If you're proactive, you're setting forth visions and those visions are coming into fruition. If you're reactive, that usually means that there's a fire and you're having to deal with the fire. And generally, when you're putting out fires after they've happened, you're talking about a much higher cost and a much lower a much lower morale throughout the whole process because of the fact that you haven't made that early investment that's properly back planned so that you can actually have a successful result. And it's one of those things that you can say a million times and a lot of people just have to kind of go through it and learn the hard way. But I will say, when you have teams that are not like you're not directly over their shoulder, you're not able to constantly see what they're doing, and they deliver and they don't hit the mark. It is one of the most uncomfortable and and frustrating experiences because usually you're on a deadline. And if you're very reliant on that and you haven't back planned for it, it puts you in a very compromised position.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's kind of, did I miss anything? I feel like that's kind of one of the main reasons you want to be clear from the get-go and work on that clarity, because the 10 extra minutes it takes to write a very thorough sentence is going to save you hours of art time.
Yeah, and you said that, and I think it's important. So I'm going to say it again because I think this is a good place to close this episode. But at the beginning, when you're laying the foundation of the thing, when you're communicating what it is, if you take more time to do that correctly, it's not a waste of time because it will actually save you, exponential multiplications of that time on the back end. Every time you have to fix something at the end of a project, it means that you have already spent man hours doing it incorrectly. Yeah. And so I get this because I help out with this student-run advertising agency, and I had a conversation today. I continue to have these conversations with these students, and they're like, well, we were in a hurry, so we didn't do the animatic. We were in a hurry, so we didn't do the storyboard. Or, they kind of phone it in because they have to do it, but they just are doing it to check a box rather than take the time to do it correctly. And then at the end, it takes weeks where it would have taken hours at the beginning to get that right, to redo it, to do it again, to do it until it's clearly communicating a good idea of what's going on. But then after you go shoot it and you go out there and you edit it, and then you're in the revision process, getting approvals up the chain, and you're going, and somebody at the top says, this is not, what was communicated to me. This is not what I want.
Yeah.
Then what does all of that work do? You have to do some of it again. And so that little bit of time at the beginning, which seems like a lot of time because it's like, listen, I don't have time for this. I am busy. I'm juggling 6 different projects today. I'm managing 15 different people or whatever. You are saving yourself time and money at the end of that project by communicating clearly at the beginning. And so don't fall for that trap of, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time to lay this out. Because I do this all the time with my own personal projects where I'm just like, I don't have time to thumbnail it. I'm just going to fly blind. And every time I do that, I end up finishing complete pages that don't end up in the book or don't end up in the project or whatever. And it's just like, why do I continue to do this? It's because I need to get to the production part because I'm so busy and I'm so rushed for time.
Yeah.
Always remind yourself every single time that you feel like you got to rush the previs. Remember that's where you save the time. That's where you save the money.
Yes. And something to keep in mind too is, I think as young artists, we're always tempted to skip the thumbnail stage. But I think if you guys have been following us for a while, I'm on page 3 of this 4-page comic for an anthology, and I feel pretty confident I'm going to finish it on time. Part of that is because I have a map. Yeah. And so I know where I'm at on the map because I took the time to put in the previs work of doing thumbnails, reworking those thumbnails, and coming up with a very clear vision of where I'm heading. And so I can actually visualize what it's going to look like at the end without a lot of speculation and without a lot of nervousness because of all the previs work.
Yeah.
If you skip that early stage, you're at this point where you're hoping for happy accidents, and that's not a really good place to be. It might work out, 1 out of 10 times, but the odds are way against you. Whereas if you do the previs, if you do the early work, if you write clear briefs, if you spend the time kind of communicating very clearly your expectations, you'll be surprised at how often those expectations are met. And so, and I can say this from experience, I've seen the best artists that I've met, deliver terrible work with a bad brief.
Yeah.
And I've seen some terrible artists deliver excellent work with a very clear and concise brief. So when it comes to kind of building those teams, and keep in mind, if you're on the other end and you're getting an unclear brief, the responsibility lies on both ends. If you're getting an unclear brief, you need to seek clarity. so that you can knock it out of the park. Because just saying, hey, hit the ball, right? When you don't know the pitch, you don't know the angle, you don't know the direction, and you don't know the game, is a real dangerous game. Whereas, if you know, like, okay, we're playing baseball, we got this situation going on. We got this guy on first and this guy on second. And if you just kind of tap it, if you can just get it moving, we might be able to steal a base. Like, all the potential. Then your game is a little more interesting, and your possibility of scoring or succeeding is a lot more likely than just kind of throwing somebody with a blindfold on a field or a court. They have no idea if it's a court or a field, and just going score goals. Well,
And
where's
I,
the
I
goal?
have
What's
I have a
the game?
perfect analogy for this that goes along with what you're saying that I used to use for a different situation, but works really well here.
Yeah,
It's like one team shows up to play baseball and the other team shows up to play soccer, and on the same field at the same time, and they're playing against each other. And somebody hits a home run, and the other team is like, well, that's not the game we're playing. And so, like, you think you understand the rules, and you think you understand when you score, and there's something weird that's going on over there, but you're not exactly sure. And so you kick the
yeah,
soccer ball into the goal, and then there's these guys running around a diamond, and you're like, well, all right, whatever. But I got my soccer ball in the goal, so I'm good to go, right? And
yeah,
that's the artist art director relationship, the designer client relationship, the project manager remote relationship. You need to make sure that you set the rule, that you understand that you're playing the same game, and that there are rules to that game, and that everybody agrees to what is a goal, like what is it, what puts points on the scoreboard. I've agreed to these metrics at the beginning before we started playing. Like, these are the rules. I played volleyball in high school, and there's high school rules that are different in the West than there are in the East. There are college rules that are different, and they're significantly different. And so when you get outside of that situation, before you start a game with people that know what they're talking about, you're going, okay, do we have a libero? Are we playing this? Are we playing that? Back row hitting. Like, you have to kind of, like, what are the what are the rules before we get this thing started, so that we can define what success is, and we can understand when points at the
yeah.
scoreboard.
And you'll be surprised. Like, I've done freelance for like multiple clients, like from tiny small businesses that are like started up by like a mom and pop to like giant conglomerate corporations. And I will say, there's across the board, you'll have art directors hire you to do a job, and they'll be like, say they're working for like a weekly, and they're like, this is an editorial, it's due tomorrow, here's the article. And that's as much of a brief as you get.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I were to just go forward with that, I'm going to turn in something that is the wrong size, the wrong resolution. I don't know if it's for print or for web.
Right.
I don't know what their restrictions are. Like, can it be full color? Can it be black and white? And there are so many potential problems with that. And I think when you're new, hopefully you've heard the art check and heard this episode, and then you can avoid these things. But when you're new, a lot of the time you're just hungry for the work. So you take the job, and then you're at that awkward position where it's an hour before deadline, and you're like, wait a minute, what size did they want?
Right.
Like, they never said the size. Like, they never actually said the physical size this drawing can be. And then, like, oh man, can it, like, where is it going to appear on the article? Is this a header, or is this like like all of those questions? It's a matter of like trying to kind of push your vision forward and perceive all the questions you're going to have an hour before it's due. And then you get like pretty used to it, to the point where I used to have a default email that I would send clients who were unsure of themselves, where it would ask like, what resolution is this? Is it supposed to be vector? Is this supposed to be a raster image? Is it in CMYK? Like, is this for print? Is this for web? Just asking more specifics, basic specifics that will help them get what they want. And it really does not hurt. And that's one of the advantages of hiring like a really seasoned artist, is like when you hire a seasoned artist, they're rarely not going to ask those questions. Whereas
Yeah.
when you hire a young kind of hotshot artist who might be 20 times better than the seasoned one, they may not know the right questions to ask to get you the art you need.
They're going to
And
give you
so
a really amazing 72 DPI illustration for your full color print thing that you're doing.
exactly, yeah, you're printing in CMYK and they might deliver stuff done in Pantone. It's just you definitely, on both ends, it's about clarity and it's about kind of helping each other achieve clarity. So in a weird way, it's like any relationship. It's like when you're married, you start learning that too. Like the clearer you are about your expectations and about like what works for you and what doesn't work for you, what upsets you, what doesn't upset you, like that, like clear communication has to do with like setting very clear expectations. And what's weird is when you set clear expectations, even if it seems kind of overdone or redundant, or kind of you might feel like an idiot when you're asking these questions. What's weird is you end up getting better results when you know exactly um, what is expected, and when you made it clear what the expectations are. So
Yeah. So Squatchy Inc. in the chat said his comic is thumbnailed and sketchbooked and scripted all the way to issue 13. So now I've got my map just like Josh said, and now it's the fun stuff. And I feel like if you eat your vegetables at the beginning, then you get to eat your dessert at the end. And I think we all enjoy the execution more than we do the planning. However, I'm such a noob that I thumbnailed each issue having like 40 pages because I got confused with page amount. So I may be scripted and thumbnailed double what a normal issue is. So anyway, that's great. So you've got 26 issues if you're
yeah,
going to do the
and
traditional
hey, you know
floppy.
what? You're at an advantage because at least you did 40, which is divisible by 4. So by like book design rules, like,
Yeah,
hey, you can have a little 40-page book.
yeah,
So,
just 10
um,
signatures and you're good to go.
mhm.
So, yeah, okay. Well, I think we could. I think we can keep going on this forever, and I think we should, but not tonight. So let's wrap this up. Thanks to everybody in the chat. Hopefully that was fun. As always, leave us a review on the podcast. I know that some of you have done that, and I failed to bring that up, but I will read those on the air here soon because that's awesome. And if you want to check out the podcast, you can always go to corykerr.com/48hr, and you want to check out my stuff, you can go to corykerr.com, corykerr.com. And Josh is always at quarterlystories.com. And then you can see the pages that he has finished and the one that he's about to finish. They're there. If you'd like to read them on mobile, then you can check that out at tapas.io and just search for Quarterly Stories and make sure that you subscribe and comment and like and all that stuff that kind of triggers all those algorithms. And you're on my channel. So if you haven't subscribed or hit that bell, make sure to do that. If you haven't hit that thumbs up, make sure to do that. And leave a comment in the things, because we're trying to trigger all the algorithms. All the algorithms will be triggered. There'll be lots of triggering of algorithms. So that'll be great. All right. So you guys are awesome. And one last thing. We've kind of forgotten to do this lately, but I think we should get back into it. I'm super curious on what you guys have found works really well or things to avoid in kind of the initial conversation when you're initiating, relationship, where you're going to be producing something for somebody.
Yeah, and to clarify too, we're not just talking about like situations where maybe you're hiring somebody. We're also talking about just collaborations. So if you've teamed up with like a buddy, like Cory and I, for instance, we've worked on projects and we're in different states. So in those cases, like I'm just kind of curious about any of those cases. If it's a collaboration where it's like you just work with the design with another person, what are some tips and some kind of maybe warnings of bad experiences, good experiences, why those things went well or badly? We want to hear in the chats. So, yeah.
All right. You guys are awesome. We will see you in a couple days. We are out.
Yes.